we are on.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the March issue of the Rabbi's Talmud class. The class is sponsored by the David Susser Trust, Ellen and George Sheeran, Nora and Jack Skiba, and in memory of Harold Grill. And can I ask that people mute themselves until the rabbi asks for questions?
Okay.
Thank you so much, Keith. I really think your introduction is getting better and better. Thank you so much for joining. And we have a very, I think, interesting subject tonight. We will talk a little bit about drinking in Purim, and we will try to understand how much of an obligation is it to drink in Purim, during Purim, on Purim, and how much, and because as some of you probably have already heard, there is this halacha, mitzvah, associated to drinking in Purim. And in some synagogues, it is taking into consideration it very seriously. And we do know that there are situations, at least in Brazil, I can say, there are some synagogues that are known by giving out drinks, alcoholic drinks to young people, and the rabbi would get very drunk, and it was very fun for the teenagers or for the young adults to go to the synagogue because they wanted to see the rabbi drunk and the rabbi dancing on the table. As funny and that it may sound, it's very problematic. We do face a crisis among young people that are starting to drink earlier and earlier, and I see here in the United States with my teenager daughter Tamar, although it's forbidden, her parties, the parties that she's invited to, do have alcoholic drink, and that the children or the teenagers themselves bring to the party. And at some point, the police come and they go home until the next party, and and then it starts all over. So I think that alcoholism and drinking, it's a challenge in many societies, and the two societies that I lived in, they are true. And I think we have a very large responsibility as leaders of a congregation. At the same time, we don't want to say we are not allowed to have a schnapps, we are not allowed to have a beer, we are not allowed to have some alcoholic drink, because drinking is part of the Jewish tradition. We do drink in our festivals, we do drink in our holidays. We drink even in a Brit Milah, we start giving some alcohol to the small child as an anesthesia during the ceremony, and we have we have wine in wedding ceremony and Shabbat and Chagim, all of the holidays. It's true that you can replace those wine. You can replace wine by grape juice in general, normally. One Chag, one holiday that you are not allowed to replace. Do you know which holiday you are not allowed to replace wine for grape juice? This is a this is a quiz, a question to you. Do you have any idea which holiday, and we are not talking about Purim, which holiday we are not allowed to replace wine by grape juice?
Passover?
Passover, you're right, Marty. Do you know why?
It's part of the service, the 4 cups of wine. I mean, I'm not,
Right, but why can't we have four cups of grape juice?
good question.
Good question, right? I try to ask good questions. Sometimes I succeed.
Drink
And
of affliction or something? To
sorry,
reflect. It says something about within the rules, drink of they refer to the wine as some drink of something. So it's a reference to the actual wine.
I'm not sure I understood you, Barry. Would you like to
Okay.
explain it
No, you're
a
just
little
you're
more?
saying what would make the rules, because the 4 cups of wine, but wine is referred to within the service as there's a reference to the wine, which is why it's wine.
Right, but we also refer to wine on Shabbat or Sukkot or Shavuot, right? We actually bless Bore Pri Agafen and in all of them, including Pesach. The bracha says Bore Pri Agafen, and the grape juice is also Pri Agafen, a fruit from the vineyard. So it could theoretically be replaced by grape juice. But the rabbi said the following: in Pesach, we are commanded to feel as if we ourselves were the slaves
Yes.
being freed, being set free, and crossing the Red Sea and transitioning from enslavement to freedom. So the rabbi said, in order for us to enter the game and to really see ourselves as the slaves making that transition, going from freedom, from enslavement to freedom, we actually cannot do it if we are totally sharp. If we are 100% there, so we need to take the wine in order to be able to play the game and to feel as if we were the slaves going out of from Egypt. So this is the reason why we are, in particular, in Pesach, not in Sukkot or in Shavuot. In Pesach, we are commanded to use wine and not grape juice. In Hebrew, it's Bechol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo keilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, we should consider ourselves as if we were in our own generation leaving Egypt. And in order to make that game, to participate in that illusion, in that we cannot be 100% sober. So let's delve into Purim itself and try to understand together, where does this obligation to get drunk come from? What is the origin of this obligation, and how can we reinterpret it in different ways in order to make it be coherent with the values that we want to sustain as a congregation that is committed to the education of the younger generation, and to ourselves too, not only our younger generations. So, we like to understand that everything in life should be balanced, right? Everything in life should be not 100% to the left or to the right, not 100% black or white, but we do believe, in particular in conservative Judaism, that there are a lot between one extreme and the other. We do believe in conversation, in dialogue, in negotiation, and in compromise. And so let's find a compromise here about drinking in Purim. So before we get to the sources, does someone want to comment on what I said until now? We are fine? Great. Let's share my screen. So this is a source sheet that was prepared by the Rabbinical Assembly, by the conservative movement, to try and address this subject. And we start from the Talmud Bavli, Babylonian Talmud. And I would love someone of you that is still sober to read from the Talmud.
I'm still sober. I'll read.
Thank you so much.
Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Megillah 7b. Rava said one is obligated to become intoxicated on Purim until one does not know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai.
Great. So just a moment. This first sentence is the origin of the obligation. Here, the obligation was born in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud, in the Tractate of Megillah. That is a tractate devoted to Purim. This is the tractate with all of the mitzvot of Purim. We read, Rava said, this important rabbi once said, one is obligated, and the word obligated is a strong one, because we are not talking about a recommendation. We are not talking about an advice. We are talking about an obligation. Obligation is mitzvah. So one is obligated to become intoxicated on Purim until one does not know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. So in addition to be intoxicated, you should be intoxicated until you get to a point that you cannot differ between good and bad, right and wrong, which sounds to me very frightening. I don't know how about you, but it sounds to me a very strong obligation, very difficult obligation, and very dangerous obligation, right? Are you all in the same state of awe? Great. Let's continue together. Keith.
Rabbah and Rabbi Zerah had the Purim feast together. They became intoxicated. Rabbah arose and slew Rabbi Zerah. The next day, Rabbah prayed for mercy and revived him. The next year, Rabbah asked him, Rabbi Zerah, let Master come and we will have the Purim feast together. Rabbi Zerah answered him, not every time does a miracle occur.
So then, after this very strong sentence in the beginning with an obligation, the Talmud brings a story. And I will read the story again, and I will ask you right after, what is the role of this story here? Why this story is here? What do they want to say with this story? And it's clearly not history. It's clearly a story. It's a legend, okay? Rabbah and Rabbi Zera, two important rabbis, had the Purim feast together. They were together celebrating Purim. They became intoxicated. So they followed the mitzvah. the obligation. They did what the Talmud is asking all of us to do. Rabbi, one of the two rabbis, arose and slew Rabbi Zera, killed him. The next day, Rabbi prayed for mercy and revived him. So the assassin, the killer, did a prayer and revived, brought back from death the other rabbi. Next year, asked him, so the next year, Rabbi asked Rabbi Zera, the one who killed, asked the rabbi who revived to come again to celebrate Purim together. Let master is you, come and we will have the Purim feast together the next year. Rabbi Zera answered him, not every time does a miracle occur. So I cannot rely on miracle twice. I was so lucky that I was revived once. I will not take the chance not to be revived the second time you kill me. So it's clearly a legend. It's clearly a midrash, is a story. It's not to be taken seriously, but it has an objective. It's here for a reason. What's the reason behind this story here, according to your opinion? And I will stop sharing a little bit just because I want to be able to see you properly. So why this story is here, according to your opinion? What is the role of this story? Yes, Yossi, and then Nancy.
I'm guessing that what the rabbis are trying to tell us is that there is a limit to everything we do.
Okay.
You can get drunk, but don't get drunk to the extent that you can cause harm to other people.
Okay, so one possibility, and I think you are right, Yossi, one possibility is that the story is coming to say there is limit, to limit, to set boundaries and say, okay, there is this obligation, it really exists, but when you are following this obligation, be aware that it can be very dangerous and you need to stop before you get to a tragedy. Before you get to a tragedy, you need to stop. You have to stop. So maybe the story there is limiting, is setting a limit to the drinking obligation. Okay, this is one possibility. Nancy?
I was just going to say that you have a responsibility to always know right from wrong, and you cannot depend on God to save you. So it's really about you have to, be responsible all the time.
Perfect. So the fact that you are following a Jewish, a religious rule, it will not be enough to protect you from tragedy. Do not rely on miracles. Be responsible. Right. I agree. It's a good message. Marty.
Yeah, one time when, as I've said a few times tonight, for some reason, I had Yatzat and Purim, and when I was working, I went to a synagogue in Manhattan, and it was, I'd say at that service, almost everyone was really seriously drunk, but though one person said to me when I was saying Kaddish, and this might be a reason why they maybe shouldn't be drunk, because it's important when you're saying Kaddish, at least someone should be able to hear it, he
It's
pointed
it's
out to
it's
me,
very funny that
it's crazy. This is very crazy. I mean,
it's funny that you brought it up because we will get there. So
I didn't know that.
one of the opinions that we will see below in a moment will say, how will we be able to fulfill
Other obligations.
all the other obligations
Yeah,
of
and that's what that
Purim
thing
if
told
we are
me.
out of our minds? If
Yeah,
we are out of our minds, how would we be able to listen to the Megillah? How will we be able to do Matanot Levionim, Mishloach Manot, all the other mitzvot, obligations associated with
this
Purim?
was after the Megillah reading, because Kaddish was at the very end. But he said that it's very important. I'll stay here. They're also, but I wonder, do all those drunk people count as the minyan? If they're so diminished, are they still, I guess so. They did the rest to the end of the service. That's a separate question altogether.
It's a very good point, Marty. Thank you. And I want to add one last thing before we go back to the sources, is that I think there is another option. I think we can also read this story not only as limiting what came before, but maybe canceling, saying, although it was the original mitzvah, we do not follow it because there was some tragedies in the past. So one way to read it right after the obligation is that it's not coming only to limit, to say drink with responsibility, or maybe to say don't drink at all. This obligation is not an obligation. This obligation does not exist. It's annulling, it's canceling the obligation that came before by saying it existed, it was true, but before of the tragedies or before the danger that it represents, we don't see it as an obligation anymore. So this is another way to see it, to read it, to read that the story is there, not just to set the limits, but to erase the text before, to say this is past, but because of reality, we don't practice it anymore. We don't do it. We don't recommend you to do. It's not an obligation. It stopped being an obligation. Let's continue a little more together, and I will share again. Let's see what Beit Abehira, this book from Provence in the 13th, 14th century has to say. Who is the next sober reader? Sober reader. Yes, yes. Thank you, Roberta.
In any case, we are not commanded to get drunk and denigrate ourselves during this time of joy, for we have not been commanded to experience joy in the form of disgrace and stupidity. Rather, we experience the joy and delight that comes from a love of God and a thankfulness for the miracles that God bestows upon us. And that which is written, until one can discern between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordecai, some Goanim explain this in light of that which follows, namely that Rabbah arose and slew Rabbi Zerah. This story comes to trump what comes before it.
So this is exactly what we said, right? So the story has a very important role there. The story is dialoguing, is with the source that came before, with the law, with the statement before, and the story comes to trump what comes before it. The story is the final word. And this is also how Talmud works, because sometimes you see several different opinions, and it's not clear which opinion prevailed. But the way the opinions are organized tell us something. The fact that Rabbi Akiva, for instance, is the last one to be quoted, it means that his opinion prevailed. So the fact that we first said there exists this obligation, but there also exists this story. That's a very strong one. And we are not allowed to endanger our lives. It's forbidden to endanger our lives. So according to Beit HaBehira by Rabbi Menachem Meiri, the story comes to trump what comes before it. And he uses a very strong language there. He says, for we have not been commanded to experience joy in the form of disgrace and stupidity. A very strong language. Rather, the joy and delight that comes from a love of God and thankfulness for the miracles that God bestows upon us. So we don't need to be drunk in order to be thankful, to be happy, to be joyful. So this is Rabbi Meiri. Does anyone want to comment on that one? No? Okay. Let's go to the next one. Sefer Kolbo, Loss of Purim. We are again in Provence in the early 14th century. So it's very, very close to the one we saw before. Who wants to read this one? It's a short one. No one? Okay, so it will be with Brazilian accent. And one is obligated to become intoxicated on Purim. This is a quote from the Gemara. One should not get drunk, for inebriation is completely forbidden. There is no greater sin than this, for it causes forbidden sexual relationships, murder, and many other sins. However, one should drink a little more than usual in order to increase happiness and also to create happiness and comfort for the poor. This is full happiness. So according to Sefer Kolbo, we are allowed to drink. And not only allowed, we are obligated to drink, and we drink a little more. We raise the bar. The bar here has two connotations. We drink a little more in order to increase happiness. So if you are accustomed to having 1 cup of wine, you may have 1.5. We may have 2 cups of wine, but you are not having 3 bottles. Because if you have 3 bottles, it will probably cause forbidden sexual relationships, murder, and many other sins. So what I want you to pay attention is that the previous source, also from Provence and also from the 14th century, says this story comes to trump what comes before. Here, according to Sefer Kolbo, we are not erasing the obligation, but we are limiting the obligation. We are establishing the limits, and we are saying, yes, you must drink, and you must drink a little more than you are accustomed to drink. You will normally drink. But it does not mean that you must get, or even that you can get drunk, that can get intoxicated. Okay, so those are the two different interpretations on the source we read in the beginning. Anyone wants to say anything before we move on? My hand was raised automatically, and let me lower my hand. Do you know that it has this feature? Now, if I do like this, it raises a hand there automatically. Now it's not working just because I want to show you. But it has those automatic reactions. Like I do like this, you see? Yeah. And it's a new Zoom feature. But it was really a side information. Let's go back
Artificial intelligence.
to the sources. Now I want to read Shulchan Aruch, because Shulchan Aruch is the most important book of Jewish laws for Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews follow Shulchan Aruch. Whatever was addressed by Shulchan Aruch is the final word. They do not discuss it. They just follow it. We as conservative Jews understand it a little bit different. We think Shulchan Aruch has an important voice. Carol, if you don't mind, I will mute yourself and let me know if you need to say anything. So Shulchan Aruch for the conservative movement has voice, but has no veto. Has voice, but has no veto. For Orthodoxy, Shulchan Aruch has veto. Whatever is addressed by this rabbi, Yosef Karu, in Tzfat, in the north of Israel, in the 16th century, whatever was addressed by Yosef Karu became for Orthodox Jews the final word, the final ruling. They normally do not argue with Shulchan Aruch. They don't disrespect Shulchan Aruch. They just follow Shulchan Aruch. So it's a very important, authoritative, and it's very important source for Orthodox Jews. So let's read from Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says the following. One is obligated to drink on Purim until one does not know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordecai. So what is Shulchan Aruch doing here? And then it's important to understand. Shulchan Aruch is quoting from the Talmud just the opening sentence. And Shulchan Aruch is not bringing the story about the tragedy that followed this sentence. So by doing so, Shulchan Aruch is saying that drunk in Purim is still a mitzvah. It's still an obligation. But this is for Sephardic Jews. Because Shulchan Aruch has two parts. It has always the first mitzvah by Joseph Caro. He is the Sephardic legislator. And then it has a gloss by an Ashkenazic rabbi from Poland called Moses Isserles. And according to Moses Isserles and according to the gloss, and there are those who say that one need not get too inebriated, rather drink a little more than usual and sleep. For during sleep, one is unable to make the distinction between Haman and Mordechai. So here, the Ashkenazic legislator, Moses Isserles, found a very creative solution for the obligation of not making the distinction between Haman and Mordechai. You just sleep. And while you are sleeping, you are not responsible for your dreams anymore. And during sleep, you cannot differentiate good from bad. So according to the Ashkenazic Rabbi Isserles, there is not the obligation to be intoxicated, but instead, once you raise the bar and once you drink a little more than you are accustomed to, you will fall asleep, and you will then, by sleeping, fulfill the mitzvah of not making a differentiation between Haman and Mordechai. And whether one drinks heavily or drink a small amount, intention towards heaven is required. So the most important thing is that the drinking happens with the intention towards heaven. You are not drinking for the sake of becoming drunk. You are drinking in order to fulfill a mitzvah, to fulfill an obligation. So what I find very interesting about this specific source is that we see a distinction between the Sephardic law, Sephardic legislation, and the Ashkenazic legislation. And according to the Sephardic legislation, you still is obligated to drink enough not to make the distinction between Haman and Mordechai. According to the Ashkenazic gloss, you must drink until you fall asleep. You don't need necessarily to be intoxicated in order to fulfill the mitzvah. Any comment on the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim? Is there any Sephardi among us? No? Everyone is Ashkenazic here? Okay, so we as Ashkenazic Jews, according to the Shulchan Aruch, are not obligated to be drunk, are not obligated to get intoxicated. We should drink a little bit more than normally, but not until the point that you get drunk, intoxicated. Let's see two more sources, one short and one a little bit longer, and we will be done. Does anyone want to comment before we proceed? Yes,
Rabbi,
Yossi, please.
I think it's a fascinating issue. On one hand, we are obligated to celebrate, to be happy, and to be happy by drinking. On the other hand, they're telling us, well, you have to be very careful be cautious. So I was thinking maybe the Ashkenazim lived much more in a society that limited the Jews in Europe. While in Tzfat, at the time, maybe there are different social values in this particular part of the world. I don't know. But it's very interesting that you compare almost an Israeli to a Jew who is not an Israeli. So, because even today, the values of Israelis are a little bit different than the values of the Jews who live outside of Israel. So maybe this was an issue. But overall, it's a very good lesson. Like you started from the beginning by giving us an example of your teenage daughter. And as you know, I went through it the same way. When my kids were teenagers, I used to get very nervous when Friday night came and they went to parties and everybody was, some parents didn't have the maturity not to have a drink in the house or not to have even drugs. So it's a big issue. At what point you distinguish between good and bad? At what point you tell your kids you can go to a party or you cannot go to a party? Because you don't want to limit their freedom. You don't want to limit their expression. So I have a feeling here with the rabbis, it's really brilliant. What they thought in the 14th century, they say, well, we want you to be happy, but be reasonable. We want you to be free, but don't be too free. And they give the excuse almost, okay, you need to be happy because we want the poor people to be happy too. Because they don't celebrate every day. They have a hard life. So they should be a little bit happier. It's a fascinating, I think, proposition here for us as Jews, what to do and not to do.
I agree. I think it's fascinating, and I think that the difference between the Sephardic and Ashkenazic legislation here is not by chance. Probably it's totally connected by the societies they lived in and the traditions around them and what the non-Jews around them
Yes.
would do or not to do, and how they were seen by the surrounding society. I agree. I think there is a very interesting sociological information here being given by this passage. Marty, do you want to read the next one? I'm asking you because it's connected to what you said before. This is the reason I'm offering you to read. It's Mishnah Berurah, and it is shown.
And it's shown in Aliyah Zuta that in any case, one must be careful to have intention for washing of the hands, the blessing over bread and the blessing after the meal. There should be joy in fulfilling these mitzvot. Read on a little bit more or no?
No, this is it. Thank you. So they were also concerned about the mitzvot that should be accomplished.
Right. Like
On the very same night. And if you drink too much, you are not able to have the intention, the kavanah in Hebrew, the right intention, while you practice the washing of hands and blessing over bread and saying the blessing after meal. You mentioned Kaddish, saying mourner's Kaddish, but it's the same idea.
Same thing.
Okay, so now we get to the very last source. The last one is a little bit longer. Does someone want to read? I need someone that is not only sober, but also it's not sleeping yet.
I can read it.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl.
From the Dear Rabbi.
Yes.
Okay. Dear Rabbi, I am an alcoholic who has managed to stay sober for the past 5 years. During that time, I've also become more religious. A friend just told me that it is an obligation to become drunk on Purim. Is this true? Frank in New York. Dear Frank, it is true that there is a rabbinic saying that on Purim, one should be so drunk that it's impossible to distinguish between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. The intent of this rule is to encourage the kind of exultant joy that Purim represents. Everyone should rejoice on this holiday, and one good way to do it for many people is to get a little bubbly. There is no requirement to get drunk, and it needs to be said that being drunk would make it impossible to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing the reading of the Megillah. So drinking a bit to encourage revelry is fine. Drunkenness is not required. For the recovering alcoholic, there is a larger issue at stake. It is also a principle of Jewish law that health concerns override ritual requirements.
Always.
Kanta Hamura Misura. Did I say that right? I hope.
Yes, perfect. Your Aramaic is great.
Someone who is struggling against alcoholism risks losing control by drinking any amount of alcohol. In such an instance, one is obligated not to drink, but you can still find ways to enjoy the revelry and giddiness of Purim. Wear a costume, prepare a Purim spiel, Nasha Hamantashen, and be the designated driver for some of your shul-going friends. Simchat Purim.
Very good.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I love this tshuva, this responsa. I think it's great. And it brings a very important principle that was beautifully read by Cheryl in Aramaic. Sakanta chamura meisura. In Hebrew, sakana chamura meisur, meaning health concerns override ritual requirements. So if you have a health concern involved, like someone cannot fast in Yom Kippur because he or she has problems with sugar and diabetes and things like that, that person should never risk their life for fulfilling a mitzvah commandment. So health issues is always, health concerns is always more important than any ritual practice. Yes, Marty.
That's so proven with Hatzalah, you know, the ambulance, the Jewish ambulance. I mean, Shabbat health overtakes anything with religious if they're in the obligation to get someone to a hospital or something on
Right.
Shabbat.
Even people who are
Absolutely.
more observant and would not normally drive, if you have a health issue, you must seek help and go to a hospital. Yes, 100%. So on that note, we concluded our sources, and I'm happy to hear any final thoughts in case we have before we say Happy Purim and a responsible Purim for everyone. Any final comment? No, Greg, you are so quiet.
You should see me during the day.
Maybe I need to teach earlier on an earlier time. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and hope to see you all during our Megillah reading, during our Purim celebration. Happy Purim.
Happy Purim, Rabbi.
Happy Purim.
Yashikoa.
Yeah, happy Purim.